any questions for the artists and their practice and their experience working here at CCC to start? Paula.
Thank you, all three of you, for those beautiful presentations. I was really struck with how both of your works deal with gender and embodiment. And if you could talk specifically about working in the site of the CCC with issues of sexuality and gender, and how does this particular environment of a cultural center foster your risk-taking, to use your words, and is that a different context than it would be, say, in a larger museum context? Is there more freedom to experiment around issues of embodiment and sexuality here at the CCC than in a larger museum?
So I think we are artists. We are very lucky can meet is the right curator and the place. So when I start talking with Abby about my whole idea about how my feel is, I use my art to present my idea in the art. Then she thought it's the right place. That's the right place for you. So I think it's basically the big background for San Francisco. This is open. It's much more freedom than other place maybe in the whole world. So I start to understand is we all have come to so many different places, but we can communicate. So like Chinese culture, so the background is everybody knows. So many immigrants come to here, so they working hard, then specialize for Chinese women. So they don't thinking about what the identity they should have right, they should do something. But the CCC and the Abby talk, that's what they do. The community is so important for this part to discover. Then my art feel that's, I can talk is very directly. So I feel I don't feel it's something can, make me feel it's a pressure. So even the work is exhibition open, maybe it's everyone have a different response. Some people thinking maybe that is now their imagination about Chinese art or Chinese women's artist work, but that's good for people rethinking about what does art mean. The art is really something discovered inner normally you cannot talk, but here you can talk.
For me, that question makes me think of the ultimate freedom that I think can happen here that doesn't happen in other institutions. And Abby and I have talked a lot about, there's not a lot of money here in this institution to do things that we always say, but within the constraints of that, there's freedom. And there's not a collector base or, people that in just very, in subtle ways and not so subtle ways can start directing the work that gets made. And it's an incredible blessing as an artist to work with absolute freedom. And that the freedom, then the constraints come from what I'm constrained by, my own constraints as an artist or the issues that I'm constrained by. And that's a blessing for an art practice, for sure.
Other comments or questions? Yes, in the back.
Hi there. Hi there. We're visiting from Oregon, and we saw this display and got invited over here. And so I'm very new to seeing these displays, but something I saw common with the two artists is you use cloth in your displays a lot and similar fabrics. I was wondering if you have a root or a reason as to why you started using cloth or when you started using it.
I like material questions, it's nice, because sometimes I think these artist things, we get up with ideas and but what's the actual material? That's a good question. But it's one I hate to talk about because I feel like artists in some ways shouldn't really talk too much about their work. It kind of kills it. And most of the ways because I think art is ahead of me. But I will say that the day I discovered cheesecloth, it did do something for my practice. And that it's a transparent, it's a fabric that is fragile and it catches light but lets light pass through it and you can project both directions onto it. And then when you layer it, it can catch one projection many times. It can be moved very easily, and it can be lit on fire. It collected ashes in the Requiem. I was able to put ashes on it. So it's just a material that really had a lot of openness to it and a lot of poetic meanings that I could keep exploring and questioning.
And for me, I use fabric a lot. The first reason is because I think that close your body. So can like it's part of your skin. So they close much as you can. Then when you do it, then you feel it's flexible and also it's very spontaneous. So that's when the softer stuff or like pliable stuff, you can feel they have a lot of possibility. When you feel freedom, you feel free, they can extend. It's more and more. But when you feel that something is against you, it's hard and cold, the softer, they like adjustment. So they protect yourself. So that's the big reason I choose something is very simple. It's not like a fancy at all, but you can find everywhere. Then you can find it's close to you.
I just wanted to jump off on your question too, because I think both of you doing installation work and sculptural work, there's a way that when we think about what people think about conventional art making, they might think about painting and sculpture, and even thinking about painting, well, canvas is cloth too, but you're really challenging people to think differently about what contemporary art making is doing by presenting cloth differently, manipulating it differently. How do you think about that in the studio? I mean, is there any particular challenge or opportunity?
For me, it's why doing work, actually I don't make the planning. So something I think is growing from my heart or from my head and my mind. They're working together. So when the canvas or materials, everything come to my hand, I try to let them go. When they go, then they something response to go back forth with you, with the material. Then the technique always can be explored. It's no limit. So that's make you feel it's satisfied. And also once your body feels something you want is too much, you cannot bear anymore, you feel it's kind of like broken. So that's you can try to use the relief for yourself. So that's is I think it's art. It's for artists. It's part of the life. It's truly. I feel that way. It's not like because I'm working, so I want to do.
I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I do notice that Stella and I both started as painters. And so there's probably something there that, to take the 2D fabric and then push it.
I mean, you follow decades of declarations that painting is dead and it never really dies, and yet, there's a moment, arguably in the 60s when so many people who were trained in painting started making objects and doing spatial kind of projects, but never really leaving behind painting as something that they had training in.
It's regrettable that in this context we are bombarded by so many visual images, particularly 2D ones, it's not that I chose to do installations because of that, but I do see there's a little bit of an edge when you're filling an environment. You are engulfing somebody in a way that holds their attention better than, people can walk by artwork that took, 10 years to make, but boom, 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 there's a visual laziness now in our culture. But when you create an environment, I think we're not, people still can respond to it because we're still bodily in some ways. Yeah.
think I saw a question right here.
I guess as each American Buddhist psychiatrist, my identity is very confusing to me at times, and because it's cumulative and interdependent, and there's so many aspects to it. And so I'm just curious how you use your art. How is your art? How do you use your art to explore, curate, let go of, or process parts of your identity? And how does this how does this solidify versus expand identity for you?
I have a real hard time talking about this one, and actually, Margo made a really lovely poetic comment to say that when identity becomes a portal for openness and making versus a burden, I have to think about that, because I feel much more, because I've been in this in-between place and unbelonging, and I don't look who I am, and whatever, that it's something that I'm always negotiating and I have no great answer for. And I think hopefully I could just make work and not have to be super conscious of the identity. Unfortunately, and Abby has been super helpful, that, like I mentioned with the YBCA opportunity, the art world, I think, is kind of at a low moment with identity politics, and that you see shows that are curated based just on identity, not by participation or merits of the work or whatever. And as an artist, you don't feel very good to be included into a show because you are checking the boxes of what so-and-so, so-and-so. And as a curator, I know Abby didn't feel good at being asked to produce a typical Chinese artist, and they had this fantasy who that artist was going to be, and I think she delighted on the fact that I showed up. And but it's important. I can't escape what the conditions that from my particular family immigrating here from China, what that has done with me and for me. And I'm gonna regret saying this, but one of the things I wanted to do as a performance project in the next year is that when I am asked to talk, to every time use an identity, like you said, I am a Buddhist psychologist. I was gonna do a performance where every time I talked, I used a different identity. So as a refugee from Syria, I would say this. As a giraffe who recently escaped from a zoo, and just every time do a new identity, because I feel like in this climate, we have to front so much with these categories that I've never felt are my home, speak about who I am. And I could come up with 10 identities that maybe, I don't know, I always feel limited and disillusioned by that. But yet we have to. And so I'll just say that I always think of Audre Lorde, who said, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. And these identities were developed by the master. And for now, we're using them to kind of re-empower ourselves, I think, about identity and stuff. But at some point, I would like a new model, maybe one based on participation or whatever, so that we don't have to front with those categories. And I hope artwork is a space where that can happen.
Yeah. I just want to say one is for identity. From my understanding, identity is not simple question, because that's change. This flooring. It's not like it's one person, just one identity. So when you be home, you be outside, you be Chinese culture center, then you're talking and you sit down there and you work. They always present a different way. So the work is never get done because they all have something new stuff that make you feel it's different. It's very unique.
How are we doing on time? 3 more minutes. So we can take 1 or 2 questions. Yes, please, Mary.
Thank you. I'm going to cheat and ask 2 questions. The first question is the same one that I asked the other artists, and that is, what were your concerns, a few years back compared to where they are now? Because, I would imagine you're always evolving. The second question is kind of coming back to materials. Is there a material that you have not worked with yet that would be challenging to you, that, you might consider working with in the future?
So it's for the material. I think everything is possible. So it really depend on your creative So for me, it's not like I use fabric, I will use fabric forever, don't touch anything else. I would love to try anything from that time I need, but I'm not gonna limit myself for I have to use something or I don't use something. That is explore, is a general, it's more like a mystery and interesting for me.
I like the question because I don't know, but the one about where was I 10 years and where, I think I'm a little more faithful about this process that I was talking about, that you have to follow the art and listen. I think when I was younger, I felt more that I had to push the agenda and be, I don't know. And then I think as I've been making work, I see that there's, for lack of a better word, a muse that I need to just be listening to and not force myself. Actually, it's an opening instead of a willful thing. And again, most organizations or institutions or art institutions are not open to that kind of thing because it means that you don't know where the work's gonna go. And that every time Abby's curated me, she really literally shows up a day or two before the opening. That would never happen in any higher stakes institution where they want to know 6 months in advance every inch of what you're about to present. And it so happens that my work is process based. So I would say that the last 10 years of working here has enabled me to become a little stronger about that faith, about following the process. And that could only have happened through working in this organization.
One more. I've been prompted. I was just going to ask you two if because you know each other so well from all these years of crossing paths here and elsewhere, if there were any questions you had of each other based on how you talked about the work and your process this morning.
One of the things about Abby is I always wondered how she is with other artists because I have my relationship with her, and I wondered what your particular one was and if it's different than mine or how because I think it's like a coach, or reminds me of a coach in that every player is different, and so a good coach says, okay, this player needs to get kicked in the ass and needs to da-da-da-da. And with me, she's been like, go and. Not very intrusive at all with what I'm doing, and I wondered how you find her.
That's the one reason I really think Abby is a great curator. So she always give you a small hint, but she doesn't give you is a limit. So she's just let you do it, Then in the process, she might print out is one point, then later it's up to you. So that's really, it's a big freedom for artists, but I will love to continue to do this way. I hope in the future, the curator always can be, yourself. It can not have to be limited. So that's how I feel.
And I just think working with Abby and learning from Abby, that's what I see with her as well in terms of her own interests. I joke about, Abby says I'm doing work about global warming, and so I'm going to go to Antarctica to learn more about that. And I think, there are a lot of other ways that would have come to me to learn about global warming than to get on a ship and go to Antarctica. But Abby shows me that, yeah, why not? So should we conclude, or is there? Thank you so much. We really appreciate your questions.